whole lot to say to y'all today because we are going to move forward. The next person I would like to bring up to the stage is City Councilwoman of Aurora, Crystal Murillo. At 23 years old, Crystal became the youngest person to ever be elected for City Council in Aurora. Her family immigrated from Mexico and has taken roots in Aurora for the past 20 years. Growing up as a single mom and in an immigrant community, she learned to be resilient, creative, inclusive, all this while resolving changes and challenges. She was taught the importance of giving back to her community and seeks to accomplish that goal through her current seat as a city council member and her educational opportunities. While on city council, Crystal also sits on the State Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Council. She works to increase college access in the Office of the Undergraduate Admissions in DU as well. In 2017, the first in her family to run for public office and achieve election for a city council seat. In 2015, she received her Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from DU. She is committed to advocacy, she's committed to the community, and helping people become resilient change makers. And isn't that why we're here today? Please give a round of applause for Crystal.
Good morning, everybody. How are you all today? Okay, we're still awake. I like it. I just had my cup of coffee too. Quick clarification, I am not myself a single mom. I was raised by one though. Thank you all for being here, excuse me. We're in Ward 1, so this is the area that I represent. I am so excited to be here with you all. As I was learning about the opportunity zones and how that might impact our local community, development and growth is the topic of discussion here in the Denver metro area, especially in Northwest Aurora, kind of triangulating growth and development in our community. And when we talk about who has access and opportunity, my fundamental question is whose opportunity? Opportunity for whom? And so I wanted to make sure that we brought together stakeholders who I hadn't yet seen in prior discussions, although I do see some familiar faces. Nonprofit, community organizations, service providers who are going to be working with people who are going to feel the impacts of growth and development. And the challenge is we're going to grow and develop, and who's going to be included in that process and who's going to be left out. So I'm really excited, like I said, to have you all to engage in dialogue and come up with solutions to how we might be able to do that and how we can partner as a city in Northwest Aurora. The Shultz Medical Campus is an opportunity zone, as well as the Arapahoe County to the southern side of Colfax. So how can we make sure that we are not excluding people in that process? So I'm really thankful that you all are here and that you're going to learn a little bit more from the folks that are the experts here on opportunity zones, so that you might understand how that's going to service your community. And I hope that this is just the first of many conversations in that development. So just wanted to say a few words, and thank you all so much for being here. And I guess we will start things off, but not before you have another speaker. So thank you all.
Hi everyone, my name is Jana Persky. I work for the State Office of Economic Development and International Trade, where I am the Opportunity Zone Program Manager. So I'll echo what Crystal and Maxine said about thank you all for being here and being part of this conversation. It's been really exciting to kind of see what's going on throughout the state. You'll hear a little bit more from me later, but just to quickly run through the program for today, this morning we're going to start to understand opportunity zones from all angles. The legal aspects of it, the investor, the projects that are developing, and so kind of give everyone that foundational understanding. And then in the afternoon, we'll move into breakout sessions so that we can kind of delve into particularly the community piece, and then, from whatever perspective other people bring, we can have a more in-depth conversation. So with that, I'd like to welcome our first official speaker of the day, Marc Shultz of Snell and Wilmer Law Firm. Marc is a tax attorney and has been one of the leading experts on opportunity zones nationally. He's joining us from Phoenix, Arizona, but does a lot of work in Colorado. and is the expert for all questions Opportunity Zone. So he's going to tell us a little bit more about what those are. Thank you, Marc.
Well, thank you. Again, my name is Marc Shultz. I practice with a law firm called Snell and Wilmer. We are a law firm of 450 attorneys based in the Southwest. I practice in the Phoenix office. We have a pretty large Denver office here, and I work with the folks here on a regular basis. We are very committed to this program, and I'll explain why once I teach the basics of the program. And thank you for inviting me. Again, I'm from Phoenix, and this gave me a good opportunity to try to find my winter coat. It's usually a couple more months before I need to find it, but it's a pleasure to be here. And again, thank you. I've been here a couple times in the last few months. In fact, right here, was it a couple months ago? About 2 months ago, yeah. So let's get started. I'm gonna go through this program, and feel free to ask any questions you have while we're going through here. So my first question to everyone here is, do folks know anything about the program? Raise your hand if you know the basics of the program. Okay, good, okay. So I'm going to go through some of the, little bit about how this came to be, and then we'll get right into, what the program is and how you structure a deal. So this program was derived from a think tank in Washington, D.C. called Economic Innovation Group. It was founded by Sean Parker from Facebook and Napster. Sean put $15 million of his own money into this think tank with the goal of the fact that he had made so much money in Silicon Valley because there's so much private capital available in Silicon Valley. His concern is why around the country, if you look at different zip codes, there is a dearth of private capital. And what can we do to solve that? What can we do to bridge the issue we have where we have this lack of private capital, but this robust amount of private capital in these other areas? And so Economic Innovation Group, being a think tank, hired policy experts. They hired tax policy experts, and of course they came up with this idea of we need to incentivize private investors to invest in these zip codes. And so, no surprise, with tax policy experts, they came up with a tax incentive. So Economic Innovation Group enlisted the help of Senator Tim Scott and Senator Cory Booker, so we had bipartisan support in the Senate, and in the House, we had Congressman Teaberry and Congressman Kind. So we had 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. Bipartisan support. We don't see that too much anymore, unfortunately, but here we had bipartisan support. They created the Investment and Opportunity Act late in 2015, introduced it in 2016. That being an election year, nothing really happened. So they reintroduced it in 2017 with almost 100 co-sponsors. So we had a tremendous amount of bipartisan support, and we started getting momentum, and then Congress decided to take up healthcare in the middle of 2017, and so this Investment and Opportunity Act just kind of sat there. Fortunately, Senator Scott and Congressman Teaberry sat on the tax writing committees, the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee, and so when we were going through the tax reform process late in 2017, we had the House bill, we had the Senate bill. The House bill had stripped out a lot of incentives, but the Senate bill had a lot of the incentives in there, including the Investment and Opportunity Act. And because Senator Scott was also a conferee, so when the House and the Senate got together in joint committee to come up with the bill to present to the President for signature, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, Senator Scott had a seat at the table and ensured that this Investment and Opportunity Act was adopted. And so we had this Investment and Opportunity Act adopted into the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. That passed on December 22nd, 2017. right before Christmas, right before New Year's. A lot of 600 pages of legislation. This is about 6 or 7 pages of the 600. And in middle of January 2018, the New York Times ran a story about this program, and then everybody wanted to learn more about this program. So this is mid-January. So states had originally 90 days from December 22nd to nominate the opportunity zones, okay? And could take a 30-day extension. So it wasn't until, I think it was about April or beginning of May, when we had all the zones certified by Treasury. And this isn't just, it's a federal program, but it's not just confined to the 50 states, it's also US territory. So the island of Puerto Rico is considered an opportunity zone. So this is a federal program, very broad, and I'm going to explain what exactly the incentives are and how to structure a deal. But as you can see, geographically, we don't have a lot of limits, and so that's a good thing. And so you're going to see funds that are based in Colorado, you're going to see funds that are based outside of Colorado that all want to do deals in Colorado. I'm going to go right to what these zones are, so I'm going to skip around a little bit here. So the country is divided into about 75,000 census tracts. These are population census tracts. And a census tract to qualify, in order to get nominated, had to meet certain economic criteria. So the first one was if the census tract had a poverty rate of, it's either more than 20% or 20% or more, it qualified. Or if the median family income was 80% or less of the statewide median family income, that census tract qualified. That, coincidentally, is the same criteria for what we have the New Markets Tax Credit Program. And a lot of the rules here are very similar to the NMTC program. And so I think you're going to see a lot of overlap on deals that, because if a deal qualifies for this program, it's probably going to qualify for NMTCs. Based on that criteria, about 37% of the census tracts in the United States qualify for this program. Then the way the legislation worked was every governor got to pick 25% of that 37%. So in the end, out of 75,000 census tracts, about 8,700 census tracts qualify for this program. And then there was a set aside or a category for, of that 25% that was picked, 5% of those census tracts could be tracts that did not qualify based on that economic criteria, but were contiguous to a tract that was nominated, got certified, and the disparity in family median income was no more than 125%. So here we are. We've got all the opportunity zones. They're all certified. And so let's talk about what this program does. So again, I'm going to let's see, go to right here. Well, let's just talk about the incentive first. So the original legislation, the original drafting of the legislation was just basically just a pure incentive for investors to invest in a real estate project or an operating business in an opportunity zone. When Congress got involved, they decided that there needs to be an intermediary. So here we have your investors, we have an intermediary, which is the opportunity fund, and then we have the project. So we have a real estate project or an operating business. So it's a multi-step process. The incentive for the investor is, and the best way to explain it is to give you an example. So if I buy Apple stock for $1 million years ago, and I sell it for $3 million, I've got a $2 million gain. So if I don't do anything, I'm going to pay tax for this year when I file my tax return, which will be next April. And so I'll have to pay tax on a $2 million gain, okay? If I invest in a fund, so if I invest in an opportunity fund, I get to defer that tax. The taxable income gets deferred into the future, which is always a good thing, right? Paying something later than paying it now gives me a benefit. So that's the first benefit. And the deferral is until December 31st, 2026. So it becomes income to me on that date. Now, if I invest in a fund this year or next year, when I do pay tax on that $2 million, I'll pay tax on 85% of the $2 million. So I get a little bit of a break right there. And if I invest in a fund in 2020 or 2021, I'll pay tax on 90%. So the later I get into the fund, I get a little bit less of a benefit on that second benefit here, okay? Which is this little bit of partial exclusion on that $2 million. Now, if I invest in 2022 or later, I don't get the second benefit listed here, but I still get the first benefit. I still get that deferral, okay? Now, those first two benefits are good benefits, right? Paying taxes later than paying it now and getting a partial exclusion on the amount of taxes I would be paying is all a good thing. The third benefit here is when I invest my $2 million into the fund, if I hold my interest in the fund for at least 10 years. So I stay in the fund for at least 10 years, and the fund does great things with my investment, and my investment grows. Let's just say it grows to $5 million. I mean, you know, the asset has appreciated to $5 million. If I sell my interest in the fund for $5 million, then that $3 million of growth will be tax-free. So that's where folks are really excited, because you know, an investment still has to have, you still have to have a return on investment, right? You know, if I'm looking at that third benefit, I put $2 million in, I'm expecting after 10 years that $2 million on whatever the investment is to appreciate to something that makes it worth the investment. About 3 weeks ago, we were given regulations from Treasury, and one of the things that the Treasury regs did is there was always a question of, at the end of 10 years, do I need to sell? Can I, you know, or if I don't sell, how long can I stay in this deal and still get that tax-free appreciation? And so what Treasury told us is that you can stay in the deal. Now, obviously it depends on the fund documents and what the deal is with the opportunity fund, but you can stay in the deal and sell your interest all the way through December 31st, 2047. So that's a long time, and still get that tax-free appreciation. So that was one of the regulations provided a lot of taxpayer-friendly guidance, and this is one of those pieces. Let's see. Then the question is, what gains qualify? So remember in my example, I'm selling stock. So I need to sell something for a gain, and then I need to invest proceeds into a fund. Okay, so there has to be a sale transaction and then an investment in a fund. And so let me just skip right here. So the sale itself has to be to an unrelated person. So that's one of the first requirements. The second requirement is you have 180 days after the sale to invest in a fund. Okay, so there's a time limit period, and I'm going to go into a little bit of, again, the regulations gave us a bunch of taxpayer-friendly provisions, and on this time limit, they gave us a really, really friendly provision I'm going to talk about. But going back one slide, the gains that qualify, it has to be what we call a capital gain. Okay, so if I own stock, I'm an investor, and I sell that stock, of course, that's a capital gain. If I own it for less than 1 year, it's called a short-term capital gain. So it has to be a capital gain that I have to incur, and then I need to invest in a fund. Okay. The question I get all the time is, how is this different than a 1031? Because it sounds like a 1031 transaction, which is where I sell real estate and I invest in new real estate, and because I'm continuing my investment, as long as I invest in the new real estate, I don't have to pay any tax on that. So it's very similar to a 1031, but there are some differences, and I think this is more flexible. So if I bought, first of all, I couldn't sell stock and invest in real estate and do a 1031. It has to be real estate for real estate. So that's one of the big differences here. Here I could do stock for real estate. The second difference is if I bought $1 million of real estate and sold it for $3 million, and I want to defer 100% of my gain, I have to buy new real estate for at least $3 million. So that original $1 million, I don't get to keep. I got to put that in the new property. Here, in my example with the $1 million of stock, I could keep the $1 million. I'm only investing my gain, so the $2 million. And then the other thing with the 1031 is When I sell real estate, I have to put it in an escrow account. I've got a whole qualified intermediary. I can't touch the cash. Here, I can do whatever I want with the cash. I have 180 days to come to the table with cash to put into a fund. So I was given this presentation in Las Vegas, and someone asked me, if I take the $2 million and I go to a casino and I lose it all, can I still participate in this program? And the answer is yes, as long as you come to the table. If you want to defer 100%, as long as you come to the table with $2 million within 180 days and invest in a fund, yes, you can do that. I can invest, if I want to defer half of my gain, I can invest $1 million. So this is much more flexible than a 1031. The one big difference is here there is a day of reckoning on your $2 million of gain. With the 1031, you can keep extending that into the future by reinvesting in new properties. Here you're going to pay tax on that $2 million, and if you invest early enough, it'll be on 85% of the $2 million. So that is one of the big differences. So let's just move forward. Who are the folks that can invest in funds? It's not a question of who can invest, it's a question of who can't invest. So corporations can invest, individuals, trusts. And in fact, one of the questions I get all the time is, isn't there a cap on this program? Because I do a lot of new markets tax credit deals. In fact, that's one of the reasons that drove me into this program, is I do a lot of tax incentive deals, low-income housing tax credits, new markets, historic tax credits. I do a lot of in the renewable energy field, and because they're all incentive programs and the rules are very similar, that was why it was a perfect fit for me to learn this particular space. But in the new markets tax credit program, which has tremendous community impact, the only problem is there's just not enough credits to go around, right? The new markets tax credit program is a cap program, $3.5 billion of project costs per year, okay? And we would love for that to get increased because the projects are out there. Here we have no cap. We have a theoretical cap, and that is if we run out of capital gains, we don't have investors, right? But Economic Innovation Group, they did a study and they said, to find out how much in potential capital is there to invest in this program. And originally they came up with $2 or $3 trillion, which is a huge number. But then they revised it upward, almost doubling it, 6 trillion, because it's 5 or 6 trillion, because they said, oh, we forgot, corporations can invest as well. So if a corporation were to sell a subsidiary, they can also invest in this program. So there's plenty of capital here. It's almost an unlimited supply. Let's talk about the 180-day period. I'm gonna jump up to a slide here, because this is interesting. So in the a lot of folks were concerned that they missed the window. They were investor in a partnership or an LLC or an S corporation, and that entity had a gain back in January. Okay, and that entity didn't invest in a fund, but the gain in those are called pass-through entities. Those entities don't pay tax, but what they do is they give you a form that you give to your accountant, and you pay tax on what gets allocated to you, because all the tax attributes get allocated to the members, shareholders, partners. And so the IRS said that in that situation, the entity could invest in this program, and the entity has 180 days after that gain. To the extent that the entity doesn't invest, the shareholders, partners, or members could invest. And so that's great, right? They said, okay, since it's a pass-through entity, those equity holders can invest in the program. And then the next question is, well, if I'm an equity holder, how do I know that that gain was generated in January? I'm not going to find out until the end of the year when I get what's called a K-1 from the entity to give to my accountant. And the IRS gave us huge relief there, and they said, if you are an equity holder in one of those entities, your 180-day period doesn't even start until the last day of the entity's tax year. So there are a lot of folks that were investors in LLCs and there were gains earlier this year that thought that they missed the boat on the 180 days. And the truth is their 180 days doesn't even start until December 31st. And then they have 180 days. And then there's also an alternative rule that says If you don't want to use that 180-day period and you want to invest sooner, you make an election and you can go and use the 180-day period of the entity. So this is where the regulations were very helpful. In fact, the regulations did a really good job of telling us, I'm going to go back, the first step from the investors to the fund, the regulations gave us a ton of guidance. Where the regulations fell short is they didn't give us a lot of guidance on qualifications at the fund level and at the lower tiered level there with the businesses or the real estate projects. But we have, this is just the first set of regulations. We're probably going to see in the first year probably 4 sets, and we're probably going to see another set by the end of the year or right after the first of the year. And so those regulations will address the opportunity fund and the lower tiered entity. So now let's talk about, well, let me go back to this page right here. December 31st, 2026 is that day of reckoning, you know, when you're going to be subject to income tax, right? So the question a lot of folks were asking is, well, you know, I've got this $2 million of gain, and what if the investment's not worth $2 million anymore? You know, and is it really fair that I pay tax on $2 million when you know, unfortunately, because we're in some down market, and I know folks never want to hear the word down market, but it could happen, or we go through different cycles. And let's just say my $2 million investment is worth $500,000 on December 31st, 2026. Well, the brilliance of this legislation is they gave us what we call downside protection. So if my investment, my $2 million investment is only worth $500,000, that's what I'm going to pay tax on, okay? And if, God forbid, the fund, bad things happen and the fund loses all my money, I won't have to pay tax on that $2 million. So from an investor standpoint, this is a huge key feature. Very important because, again, if the market goes down, my tax goes down. And that's really important. Then the next, I'm going to skip through a few of these slides here and go right to this slide here so you can see the timeline involved, okay? So I've got, and this depicts exactly how this works, right? I have a sale, I have 180 days to invest in a fund. And then if I hold my interest in the fund for 5 years, I get to reduce that gain by, I earn 10% reduction, okay? And then if I hold it for another 2 years, I get to earn another 5% reduction. That's why we get to, if I invest in if I invest this year, next year, right, I will have 7 years of runway between the time of the investment and December 31st, 2026. That's how I get the 15% reduction. If I invest in 2020 or 2021, I don't have 7 years of runway, but I still have 5 years of runway. So I get to reduce by 10% that gain. And then obviously after 2021, I don't have 5 years of runway, but I just get the deferral, okay? So if you look at this, and you do the math, you're gonna come up with, okay, wait a minute, on December 31st, 2026, I have an income event, but I'm still not at the 10-year mark, right? So I still need to pay taxes on April of 2027, but there's no way I want to not hold my investment for 10 years and get that 10-year benefit. So folks have to plan for the ability to pay taxes before they hit the 10-year mark, right? And so a lot of funds are going to probably do refinancing, distributions. I mean, every fund will have a strategy on what to do on that liquidity event. I've talked to some banks that are talking about loan products where they can make a loan to these investors so that the investors can pay their taxes. So that is a problem, but there will be plenty of solutions for that problem. And now I'm going to talk about what is an opportunity fund. Okay, so an opportunity. So when we first got this legislation, in the legislative history, they talked about an application process, a certification process. And so folks thought that you're going to have an application you send to Treasury, you got to wait a few months, and then you get something stamped saying you're now an opportunity fund. Well, 4 or 5 months ago, Treasury said, no, we're going to do a self-certification process. And so we're going to give you a form that you're going to attach to your tax return for the year you want to be an opportunity fund, and you'll self-certify to a bunch of things. And so 3 weeks ago, we got that form. It's a fairly simple form. You self-certify that you're an opportunity fund. You have to be a corporation or you have to be a partnership for tax purposes. So you can be an LLC, you can be a limited partnership. If you're an LLC or limited partnership, you have to have 2 equity holders, okay? Because otherwise you're not a partnership for tax purposes. The other thing that they said is that we need there's a 90% requirement, and I'll talk about that because that is the most important requirement here is this 90% requirement. So 90% of the assets of the fund have to be qualifying assets, okay? And if you don't meet that, you have a penalty, and it's not an insignificant penalty. It's an annual penalty of 5% of that 90%. So if there's $10 million in the fund, and you are in penalty territory, and you've got 0 qualifying assets, right, on $10 million, you're going to have a penalty of, what, $450,000, right? Did I do my math correct? Yeah. So let's talk about the 90% requirement, okay? So 90% of the assets have to be what's called opportunity zone property, okay? This is tested twice a year. It's measured twice a year. It's tested really once a year, but you take the average of the 2 measurement dates. So my first measurement date is 6 months, the midway point of the year. My last measurement date is December 31st, the last day of my taxable year, okay? And then I take those 2 numbers and average it. Now, the one thing that folks were hoping with the regulations is that they would say, hey, no matter when you form your fund, you get 6 months, okay, before your first testing date. And unfortunately, Treasury said no. If you form a fund right now, your first testing date is December 31st, okay? So if you form it now, you've got to meet this on December 31st. And now that has now driven folks that we're representing that have funds to say, I'm not doing anything until January 1st to get myself to June 30th. And that makes sense. So, and truthfully, that's what's needed right now, as folks are forming their funds and working on their strategy. Not to just jump in and just say, okay, here, I'm going to take money today, and then I'm going to figure out my 1231 problem, because people do have 1231 problems right now, because they've got cash, but they need a project for their cash. So the 90% requirement, and I'm just going to jump up to right here. I said 90% of the assets have to be qualifying assets, okay? So there are 2 different approaches to this, okay? The fund could just own a qualifying asset, what we call on the bottom here, opportunity zone business property. So that is I said the most important requirement is the 90% requirement. The most important definition here is this definition of opportunity zone business property. So if the fund is going to own an asset, it has to be opportunity zone business property to be qualifying. Now the other way the fund can do is what we call, that's called the direct approach. The other approach is the indirect approach, and that is where the fund invests in a business, an entity, okay? And that entity can run a business or it can engage in a real estate project. And that business has to be what's called an opportunity zone business, okay? But even if you go the indirect approach, there's still a requirement that 70% of the tangible property of that opportunity zone business has to be opportunity zone business property. So again, we get to this definition of opportunity zone business property. Most important definition. I'm going to go right to what that is. So I'm going to skip over a number of slides here, and I'm going to go right here, okay? Opportunity zone business property. Again, most important definition. It is tangible property acquired by purchase. Remember the word purchase, from an unrelated person. Okay, so I can't have the fund go, I can't be the, I can't hold all the interest in the fund and then go buy property from my brother and have that qualify. Okay, it has to be an unrelated person. After December 31st, 2017, okay? So they're looking for new property, right? And then the next requirement is that I need to be the original user of that property within the zone, okay? So if I go and buy, so let's talk about original use. Okay, so if I go and buy used equipment that's sitting in Cherry Creek, I'm guessing Cherry Creek is not an opportunity zone. I could be wrong, but I'm just guessing that. and I move it to an opportunity zone, that equipment. I am now the original user of that equipment in the opportunity zone, okay? But what about real estate? I can't move the real estate. The real estate is permanent, so I can't be the original user of real estate in the opportunity zone. So to meet original use, they gave us an alternative requirement, an alternative test. And they said, okay, if you can't meet original use, you can meet the substantial improvement requirement. And that says that if I buy this real estate and I substantially improve it, I can make it into qualifying property. And so what does substantial improvement mean? It means if I buy something for $1 million, I need to spend more than $1 million improving it, okay? And I have 30 months to do that. So you get to choose a 30-month period to make those improvements. So you know, folks, so that's been in the, you know, that was in the original legislation, and we've had a number of folks on the coast, East and West Coast, say, I can't buy building and land and just make improvements to the building and meet that test. It's impossible. The land is too expensive on the coast. So in the regulations, the IRS and Treasury came up with a special rule, and I'm going to say it's a special rule. So if I buy land in a building, I get to measure this substantial improvement requirement by just looking at the building and doubling the basis of the building. So if I buy land in a building for $1 million, and the building's worth $400,000, the land's worth $600,000. If I want to get both the land and the building in as qualifying property, I just need to spend more than $400,000 improving the building, okay? Now, this is a special rule, and they gave us an example where they gave us that same example, 60% land, 40% building, and in the example it was a factory that was sitting vacant, and the developer was going to turn this into a real estate project and spent more than the $400,000 improving it, okay? And so a lot of folks are asking, the takeaway is, again, this was an example and a special rule on land in a building, and so now I'm getting questions, well, what if I sell you land and you say, okay, put a $10,000 building on the land, and then you'll spend $10,001 improving that building, but the land's worth $2 million, right? And so my takeaway is that is abusive, and I would not recommend anyone do this. I think the IRS is going to give us further guidance on this, on what the land and building proportion should be. My advice to folks is follow that example. If the building is 40% or more of what you're purchasing, then that should be good. But I would not look at. I mean, the spirit of this program is that Congress wants folks to stimulate the economy, right? They want you to buy something and do something big on it, right? And so the takeaway here, and you'll hear it from folks, well, land and building, you only need to double the basis of the building. That is correct. But I would just proceed with some caution on that and the proportion of land in the building. So, any questions? Oh, that's that's a good question. Okay, so vacant land. So my advice on vacant land is you need to double the basis of the land purchase price. It is an open issue that Treasury is looking at right now, because if you just look at the logic of this special rule, it says all tangible property to be qualifying property, you need to double the basis, right? And so in the revenue ruling, they mentioned something about land is permanent and the land portion in that revenue ruling does not need to meet the substantial improvement test. But again, this is a limited fact pattern, and so there are some people out there saying if I buy vacant land, I don't need to improve it. That would be the logic from the revenue ruling. I don't think that that's within the spirit of the program, and again, I think Treasury will visit this. I would be surprised if you don't need to do something on the vacant land. I mean, you have to operate a trade or business on the land to make it qualify. But I've already got the question from folks saying, well, what if I buy vacant land and I just pave it and turn it into a parking lot? Is that okay? Because I'm operating a trade or business on the land. And my answer there is, I don't think that's okay. And again, I think this is where Treasury is going to provide further guidance. So if you're buying vacant land, I would say, you need to double the basis of that land. If you're buying land in a building and the proportion is right on the building, 40% or higher, then there you can look at that and say, I need to double the basis of the building to get both in. So again, I said that the requirement is that it has to be tangible property acquired by purchase, right? And so that's that's an issue we have right now. In fact, we submitted comments on behalf of one of the Native American tribes about 2 months ago on this issue, because Native American land is held in trust by the U.S. government for the tribes, right? And so they can't sell their land, and so everything is ground lease. And so that is not an acquisition by purchase. The question is, how do you measure that for this? Remember, 70% of your assets have to be good assets. So the question then is, how do you measure this leased land? Do you measure it based on, like, from an income tax standpoint? If I lease land from you, I have zero income tax basis in that land, and so on my 70% requirement, it wouldn't go in the denominator or the numerator. It would be a tax nothing. But that's not how the IRS gave us some guidance on that 70% test, and it's just confusing guidance. It says you got to use GAAP treatment if you have financial statement, or if you don't, you get to use cost, but they didn't tell us how you define cost. So it is all I could say, not to get too technical, but it's an open issue, and out of the 8,700 census tracts, I think over 800 are on Native American land, but then there are a lot of tracts that have state or municipal owned land where they're planning on leasing that. And so I think this is going to get worked out, but we're going to need the next set of regulations to work this out on how you treat leases. So. Well, so the problem is the leasehold is bad property, according to this definition, right? And so for an opportunity zone business, and I know I didn't talk about the indirect approach yet, but under the indirect approach, substantially all of so under the direct approach, 90% of your assets have to be qualifying, right? And a leasehold interest is not qualifying. So the question is, how do you measure that leasehold interest? Because if you have value that you have to put on there, you can only have 10% bad assets. Am I running out of time? Oh, I'm good. Okay. So under the indirect approach, you could have 70%. You have to have 70% good assets, 30% bad assets. So again, the measurement is, how do you measure the leasehold, right? Because you can only have 30% bad assets. So let's just say that I have to measure the leasehold as $3 million, right? So in order then to make this qualify, I have to put $7 million of development on top of that leasehold to get myself into a 70-30 proportion. So what we're hoping is that Treasury gives us guidance that says that a leasehold is measured as a zero. And if it's measured as a zero, then anything I build on it is good property. That's what we're trying to get Treasury to tell us. And because again, we can't get them to change the definition of opportunity zone business property, because we can't get them to change the word acquisition by purchase to acquisition by purchase or lease. It would take congressional action. They'd have to change the statute. So again, our hope is how you measure the leasehold interest. I am very, very confident that this is going to get worked out. It's just one of those issues to be aware of.
Yes, I have a question. Point of clarification. In the example used with Apple stock, $2 million stock, that went to purchase this opportunity zone, went to $5 million. I was looking at this because capital gains is also tax exempt. Apparently, that's not tax exempt. Can you please clarify that?
Yeah, so in the example, I sold Apple stock for a $2 million gain, and I invest the $2 million in the fund. So the $2 million will be taxable to me at some point. I might be able to get a little bit of a break if I invest early enough, so that I'm only paying tax on 1.7 million of 15% write down. So, but I'm always going to pay tax. I'm never going to get away without paying tax on 1.7 million of that capital gain. So where the big break is the growth on the investment, right? So to the extent that $2 million goes up in value, so to the extent that the $2 million is for the purchase of real estate that appreciates, that's where I'm going to get that big tax break when I sell that eventually. But that's why these deals have to have an ROI, right? Because if you invest in a piece of land and it doesn't go up in value, you're not going to get anything really out of that 10-year benefit, right? You'll get the first two benefits. You'll get the deferral. You'll get a little bit of reduction on that $2 million. But if the $2 million is still worth $2 million at the end of 10 years, you're not getting that third benefit.
Marc, if an investor, that's loud enough, if an investor already owns land in an opportunity zone, you've talked about having to buy the transaction that occurs after January 1st to 2018 or 2019. And then adds, let's say that land is worth $1 million and they build a building on it that costs $4 million. Does that qualify?
Okay, that's a great question. So now we get into what we call the indirect approach, and I'm gonna just talk about the indirect, and then I'll answer that question. So under the indirect, remember I said that the opportunity fund can own assets directly, right? And it can own opportunity zone business property, or it can invest in a business, an entity, okay, that is either doing a real estate project or operating a business. So if it does the indirect approach, the rule is that, let me just go right here. So the first rule is that 70% of my assets, of my tangible assets, which would be real estate, has to be opportunity zone business property. So it has to be qualifying. So in your example, if I own land that I purchased before 2017, I can't make that land into good property unless I sell it to this business or I sell it to the fund, and then I can't take more than a 20% interest in the fund because it'll be a related party transaction. But what I can do is I can just say that land that I own pre-2018 is just a bad asset and it's worth $1 million. So that goes into the 30% category. So now I need to build on top of it so that everything I build on top of it is a good asset. So I need to get into a proportion of a 30-70 split, right? So if you just do the math on $1 million, I need to, because that's a bad asset, I need to build something that's 2.5 times $1 million. That will get me into the 70-30 split. So if I build something that's $2.5 million, so if I put $2.5 million in improvement or more, I can get myself into the 70-30, the 30-70 split and make that work under this indirect approach. Did I answer that question? So there is a way to make that work, but you have to do a significant development on this land, or you could just sell that land to an entity and have them double the basis of the land, but you can't take more than a 20% interest in the fund, or you're going to have a related party transaction. It is, but not. Let me go through the other requirements, and I'll show you why. So for this entity, so this is this lower tiered entity, and this is how all the deals are going to get structured. Okay, we're not going to see funds operating businesses. We're not going to see funds doing the real estate projects as right now, because we don't have a grace period on holding cash. So remember, my 90% cash is not a good asset. And so at the fund level, if I'm holding more than 10% of my assets in cash and I hit these measurement dates, I've got a big problem. So what they did for us in the regulations is they gave us a safe harbor on cash if you invest that cash into a lower tiered entity. And that's this, in this example, the opportunity zone business here, okay? And now let's look at the qualifications of that opportunity zone business. So the first is the 70% test, right? So 70%, so our land in our example, $1 million, bad asset, we need to build something that's $2.5 million or more on top of it. The next test is called the intangibles test. Not going to really come into play with real estate, but a substantial portion of my intangible assets have to be used in a trade or business in the zone. The next test is called the gross income test. 50% or more of my gross income has to be used in the active conduct of a trade or business in the zone. So I just want to point this out. The word active is an issue right now. We don't know. Some people think that triple net leasing might not be meet the definition of active. So that's an issue we still have out there. And then the next is what a lot of folks are talking about, and this is a cash test where we got a huge amount of relief. So in my example, investor puts money in the fund by the measurement date puts the money into a lower tiered entity. That means that's going to qualify as an opportunity zone business. And so here we get into another test on cash. And this says that if 5% or more of my assets are in cash, then I've got a problem. So that sounds worse than the 10% test. But there's an exception in the legislation for reasonable working capital. And so what the IRS did is they gave us a safe harbor that says, listen, when the fund puts the money into that lower tiered entity, if there's a written plan in place that says exactly what you're going to do with that cash, and you're going to do that with that cash within 31 months. So if I'm going to take that cash, I'm going to purchase property, I'm going to improve that property, and I'm going to do it all in 31 months, then that cash is considered reasonable working capital. And if it's reasonable working capital, it's not bad. And so here in your example, you're going to need to put the cash, your cash goes into the fund puts it into the lower tiered entity. You're going to need a written plan in place that tells you what you're going to do with the $2.5 million of cash over 31 months. And they gave us an example in the regs that says, in that example, the cash was placed in the lower tiered entity. Within 1 month, they bought the land. Now, in your case, you already have the land. But they bought the land, and then they took 30 months to improve that land. And that qualified. And so that's how these deals are going to get structured. You're going to see two entities. You're going to see a fund, you're going to see a lower tiered entity, and you're going to have to meet those requirements. So in your example, in order to make that work, I've got $1 million of property. It's considered a bad asset. So I'm going to populate have the fund put cash into the lower tiered entity, and then within 31 months, I'm going to use that cash to improve that property. And again, I have to improve it by 2.5 times that $1 million. Yeah, see what the Treasury is worried about is they don't want folks just parking their cash, right? They want to know, one, you have the cash, two, they want to know what your project is, and they don't want folks just playing a deferral game. And that makes sense, right? They want this program to be successful, and so they want you to be able to, they have this, this written plan in place, and they want you to be able to implement that written plan. So it's really hard to do these deals unless you have actual projects lined up, right? You can't do it on spec. You really have to know your deal that you're going to, if you're going to do your own fund, right? And if you're going to invest in another fund, they're also going to have a pipeline of projects to deploy that capital into. So they're not going to just be holding the money and just looking around. They know where they're going to deploy that shortly around it's going to kind of all come together at the same time. Am I out of time? Okay. Well, that was my last slide, and thank you very much for allowing me to spend my morning with you. So.